listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 13th of May 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, Greece's Prime Minister heads to Turkey. Is this a sign of a thawing in testy relations? Also ahead in the next 60 minutes, Lithuanians stay with a pro-Ukrainian president in the first round of an election, focusing on security issues in the Baltic. Plus,
some people believe that Dominic Vlasny, because of his background as a physician, as a musician, he's also quite telegenic, I would say, believe that he can bring some fresh ideas, especially in the big old parties.
Previously dismissed as a joke, we find out why in Austria beer becomes a key political theme in the forthcoming elections. And
just to be a part of it was special, and to know that a song that has changed my life, has touched so many people, is the most insane thing that has ever happened to me.
Well done, Nemo, Eurovision's winner from the weekend. But did the fun win over the politics in Malmö? Our Eurovision correspondent Fernanda Augusta Pacheco will bring us a debrief of Saturday night. That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. Russia's long-standing defense minister Sergei Shoigu is expected to be removed from his post by President Vladimir Putin. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said Israel lacks what he calls a credible plan to protect Palestinian civilians in the southern Gazan city of Rafah. And Spain's Socialist Party has won the biggest share of the vote in this weekend's regional election in Catalonia. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, Greece's Prime Minister is in the Turkish capital of Ankara today. It's a moment when relations between the two historical rivals are reportedly enjoying a diplomatic thaw. Well, to find out more from both the Turkish and the Greek side, let's hear from Monocle's Istanbul correspondent Hannah Lucinda-Smith and from Maria Gavuneli, who's director of the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy. A very good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Hannah, if we can begin with you, because this is where all the action's happening. What is happening today?
Yeah, well, this is the latest in a series of meetings between Erdogan and Mitsotakis. This time it's Mitsotakis coming to Ankara at Erdogan's invitation. Back in December, it was the other way around. Erdogan was in Athens. And it is, as you say, the kind of latest sign of thawing in relations, which have been really, really strained for the past few years. To give it a bit of context, there are issues between Turkey and Greece, which are kind of perma issues. There have been issues for as long as these two countries have existed, principally about maritime borders in the Aegean. Also, more recently, about migration. Obviously, you know, it's been an issue not just for Greece, but for the whole of Europe, this kind of flow of people coming with people traffickers from the Turkish coast to the Greek islands, also undersea gas strikes and also Cyprus. So there are some pretty serious issues. Nobody is saying that these issues are solved by any means, but it certainly does seem that since last year, when both Mitsotakis and Erdogan were re-elected, there has been a will on both sides to kind of, rather than, you know, fire barbs at each other, in one case a few years ago, almost coming to the brink of a sea war in the Aegean. Both do now seem to have a will to get talks back on track and to thrash out these problems in meetings face to face.
Maria, let's bring in a little bit of the context of this. I mean, Hannah has touched on the fact that relations have been incredibly difficult for the last few years. But what has been happening between the two countries?
Well, over the years, we do have an issue relating to the delimitation of our maritime areas in the Aegean. Subsequently, and in a steady growth from 1974 onwards, more or less, the Turkish side has actually added on to this pile of trouble. The Greek side suggested that the only thing that needs to be discussed is actually the delimitation of the continental shelf. And that really creates a box of wonders, if you like, that could go up anytime, at any moment. Over the years, we have our peaks and lows. There have been times when we have started talking, and at some point 25 years ago, we were apparently that close to a solution. But, myth surrounds this era that was a sort of golden rapprochement. Since then, until almost 2 years ago, we ended up with a very bad situation where we simply did not talk to each other anymore. And we were having fun and games in the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean with our navies and submarines and whatnot. And in the past slightly more than a year and a half, we have this window of opportunity, this calm. No more fun and games in the Aegean. We have started talking to each other, which is essential. And as you have seen, the two leaders exchange visits on a pretty regular basis. That does not mean that we have become the best of friends. In fact, this is a tightrope visit, the one that Mitsotakis is paying Erdogan today. But it is clearly much, much better than fighting it out in the Aegean.
Hannah, let's build on a little bit about this, what's brought about this approach. How much is it believed that two things, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the war in Gaza, may have changed the way that Mitsotakis and Erdogan deal with each other? Yeah,
I mean, certainly, looking at it from a sort of national security point of view, I think for all NATO members, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has really sharpened focus on the importance of NATO. Back in the kind of really bad days of relations between Turkey and Greece a few years ago, it was only through NATO at one point that the two countries were actually communicating. And now they have more of a shared cause. Also, they're both saying very, very similar things about Gaza, although coming from very different directions. Obviously, Erdogan's interest comes from a sort of religious ideological viewpoint, and he has always been a very staunch supporter of Palestine and the Palestinian people. But what's happened since October the 7th has really kind of brought Turkey and Greece close together on those issues as well. But also there's the economic thing. These are neighbouring countries. They are countries that have a lot to gain from each other economically. And we've seen that in the past month since Greece reintroduced a border visa for certain Aegean islands for Turks. Usually Turks, if they wanted to travel to Greece, they would have to get a Schengen visa, which is quite a lengthy, difficult and quite expensive process. This visa means that for €60 and a bit of paperwork, Turks can go to the closest Aegean islands, and that has been hugely popular. We've seen tens of thousands of Turks going to those islands for holidays, and clearly, that's a huge boost for Greece. And similarly, if Greeks also come the other way to the Turkish coast, that's a boost as well. And one of the key things we're expecting to see today is a joint business council for Greek and Turkish business people to be set up. So I think that is a really major prize for both.
Tell me a little bit more, Maria, about the issues that need to be addressed and how maybe external influences could help. I mean, there is this issue, the fact that, we have NATO, we have the EU surrounding them, and in the case of Greece, sort of embracing them, and for NATO, for Turkey. How much can foreign influences actually try and bring Turkey and Greece back together to solve absolutely intractable problems, such as, for example, Cyprus?
Well, depending on whom you're listening to, not much or not enough or too much or too overmuch. Well, the thing is that Greece and Turkey became members of NATO together in 1952. They were treated pretty much as an item up to until 1974. And from that point onwards, when we started really sharpening our arguments in the Aegean, NATO was trying to play the neutral, if you like, sort of an attitude that says, oh, come on, kids, fight it out between yourselves and, keep it tidy. And that has created a certain resentment to both sides, because obviously each side suggests that NATO is actually favouring the other one. In times of trouble, however, it is absolutely true that NATO was the only forum where we could still talk to each other. And that is no mean thing. It was really the only way in which we could smooth our way forward, if you like, where we could pass by the thorny issues that we had. In terms of the European Union, as you indicated, Greece is a member of the Union for the past 40 years and quite clearly understands itself as part and parcel of the Union. On the other hand, Turkey has consistently tried to take the Union out of that discussion, requesting that the European Union would actually play the role of a neutral third, which is simply unacceptable for the Greek side, because what's the point of being part and parcel of a union if at the time of need you play the neutral third? So yes, there is quite a lot of discussion and quite a lot of pressure, especially at times where things were getting difficult. But on the other hand, do not expect that third parties would somehow resolve the issue between the two parties. We are neighbors. We are destined to live by each other, and we must find a way to agree to disagree and move on.
Maria Gavanule and Hannah Lucinda Smith, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist. Let's continue now with a look at today's newspapers. I'm delighted to say that joining me in the studio is Yossi Meckelberg, Associate Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House, and a very regular voice around this desk. How are you, Yossi?
I'm all right. How are you?
you sound wiped out. We haven't even started Monday yet.
Well, it's early morning on a Monday. We're just getting used to all the what's going on in the world.
Okay, well, let's fire you up. Let's have a look at the papers. There's lots to look at today, isn't there?
Yeah. Shall we start with Russia?
Please do.
And, the decision to change the defense minister there, which is not that surprising. We see what happened right now in Russia. The war is almost 2.5 years old in Ukraine. Putin was elected again with 87% support, so they're probably still looking for the other 13% that didn't vote for him. And it needs to keep the movement there, to keep in place. The Russian army and the military is doing better, unfortunately, in Ukraine. But it doesn't mean that there are a lot of issues, and looking back at where they failed from the beginning. So here someone, deputies of the defense minister who just been replaced were arrested for corruption. So it's very typical of dictatorships. Don't let someone stay too long, accumulate power, and then maybe put under risk my own place. So I think that's part of what you see. Also, the person replaces him. It's very interesting. Instead of a general, an economist. So it means, moving to look into the war economy in Russia, less about military strategy.
Indeed. I mean, there's an excellent article in the New York Times which sort of lays all this out incredibly clearly, doesn't it? And it makes the point, as you've just said, that Andrei Belousov, who's the economist who's now going to be the head of the military again, is in charge because there is a fear that the ballooning defence budget is clearly damaging the Russian economy. But also it raises the point that Vladimir Putin does not like to make big, rash changes very much. I mean, Shoigu's been in position for more than a decade now, despite the fact that he didn't have any military experience before he started. He was an engineer.
But that's the kind of things that, on the one hand, Putin needs stability because everything outside his inner circle is not stable. He's not stupid. He knows that the war in Ukraine is not popular. He knows that, the longer it continues, what are the economic implications, the social implications, how many soldiers are killed, maimed in this war, the death of Alexander Navalny in jail. So it doesn't delude himself that the 87% support that he received really reflects the mood within the nation. So he needs stability within the inner circle. But too much stability in the inner circle also leave people out of it that are unhappy. So you need to create some dynamics within the inner circle at the same time that people won't feel too comfortable and might decide one point to challenge you. In this case, I think unlike other countries, Ukraine can go and ask money from the EU or from the United States. Russia can't go and ask anyone for support. Well, China, but that's very limited.
The issue here then, the big question is, what change does the departure of Shoigu and the replacement with an economist mean for those fighting the war in Ukraine? Because for Ukraine, this could mean a big change.
Yes, but it doesn't make the underlying issues when it comes to the economy. This is a war that obviously went wrong for everyone, but it went wrong for Russia. There was no plan for having a war that will last more than 2 years. The idea was something more along a blitzkrieg. It will take, very, very quickly take maybe all of Ukraine, topple Zelensky, and then in ideal scenario for Russia, instill someone that is pro-Russia, and by that maintaining Crimea and maintaining Eastern Ukraine and have influence for decades to come. Obviously, this hasn't happened, and only last week we heard that there was a plot to assassinate Zelensky. It means that they need to change track, prepare themselves for a long war. And for a long war, it means the economy that shifts to a war economy. And probably this is one of the reasons for this change.
Let's move on to a comment piece in the Israeli paper Haaretz. The headline is, Biden has not turned his back on Israel, but Netanyahu has. There have been, even before the Hamas launched its attack on Israel on the 7th of October, there were plenty of protests in Israel against the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. And Israel's campaign in Gaza has focused the minds of everybody from every kind of political side or alliance, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think this title just had it's exactly what happened. Biden supports Israel, probably now for 50 years, from being a young senator all the way to whatever role he played in an American administration, vice president, now president. When he says there is an ironclad support to Israel, he means it, and he proved it on for instance, on the night that Iran attacked Israel. But at the same, definitely from October 7. But at the same time, he always said, we support, and before October 7 as you said, we support Israel because we have communists, or we both democracy, liberal democracy. We represent something that we have in common values. Biden didn't change his values. Netanyahu is trying to change the values that Israel was founded. Today is a very somber day in Israel. It's Remembrance Day to the fallen soldiers. And as it happens in Israel, the very next day is Independence Day in Israel. I want to say celebrates, but there are no celebration this year as such. Most people don't feel celebrating the Independence Day. The values were democratic values, and that was the basis of the bond between Israel and the United States. Netanyahu is trying to destroy the liberal democracy to stay indefinitely in power.
Tell me, Yossi, about the way that the Israeli media is covering what is happening in Gaza, because I think from day one, Haaretz has been very anti-Netanyahu. It has absolutely targeted Netanyahu, but Israel is divided deeply politically, and an article like this from Haaretz, what does that do in terms of the way it influences public opinion?
Yeah, to be honest, not that many people read Haaretz as they should. It's not as happened with some of the more liberal newspaper right now, even in democracy. But it's enough, to people that you see demonstrating, protesting before October 7 and demonstrating now against what Netanyahu is doing. So first it was about maintaining the liberal democracy, protecting the judiciary in Israel, and now it's about ending the war, releasing the hostages, because Israel is more and more isolated by the day. We couldn't imagine months ago that some country will talk about arms ban, including the UK. The Israel will be in front of the ICJ. The ICC might issue arrest warrants. This is something that we couldn't imagine our worst nightmares only 6-7 months ago. This is where Netanyahu brought Israel. And I think this article, like the criticism, it's not a personal thing about Netanyahu. It's what he's doing. And this for him, it's a personal thing to stay in power.
Finally, let's touch very briefly on an article in The Guardian about protests in Tbilisi. Georgia is very much a country at a crossroads, depending on whether it turns to Moscow or whether it turns to Brussels.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the crossroad, and 50,000 people were in the street protesting. And it's, in a way, it's a reminder very similar to what happened in Israel. It's the idea, how do you weaken debate and democracy? You attack the media. You put some constraints on civil society. So you push NGOs to register if they get money from the outside, and then they blame them if they get money from the EU. It's kind of work as spies. They get money from the EU to actually enhance democracy, and then you leave the impression that getting money from the outside, they are betraying the country. And for Georgia, is it joining the EU and then you need a thriving NGO and civil society, or it's Russia and then you do exactly the opposite?
Yossi Meckelberg, thank you as ever for joining us on Monocle Radio. Still to come on today's Globalist. Well done, Nemo, and hello, Switzerland 2025. We'll look back at this year's rather complicated Eurovision Song Contest in Malmö. Stay with us on The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
It's 9:23 in Vilnius, 7:23 a.m. here in London. Now, Lithuania's current president appears on track to secure a second and final term in office after the first round of voting this weekend. Gitanas Nausėda's campaign focused on growing fears about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its impact on security in the region. Well, to tell us more, I'm joined by Alexandra Ketchler-Rine, who's Deputy Editor-in-Chief of the LRT.IT. A very good morning to you, Alexandra.
Good morning.
So just tell us a little bit more about the latest results that we have. We have Gitanas Nausėda is won, 44% of the votes cast?
Yes, actually, we have the 2019 scenario. Again, we have the current president, Gitanas Nausėda, in the second round, together with our current prime minister, Ingrida Šimonytė, in the second round too. And we had that scenario in 2019. But the numbers were a little bit different because 5 years ago, Ingrida Šimonytė was the first one to go to the second round, and now it's other way around.
So tell us a little bit more about Gitanas Nausėda and why you believe that we have a slight reversal of fortune here from 2019. He needed 50% to make sure that he wouldn't have a runoff, but he's obviously not got enough here.
Yeah, actually, he said multiple times that he, hoped that we won't be needing the second round. And actually, some people are joking at the moment that why do we need the second round? Because we all know that our current president will win. The thing is that Ingrida Šimonytė, she is like conservative. and conservatives in Lithuania, they have a really very loyal electors, people who are voting for them, but the problem is that that pool is very limited. So we think that in the second round we will see the very obvious victory of Gitanas Nausėda, of current president. I believe that he is more catch-all candidate than Ingrida Šimonytė. This may be the main reason why he succeeded. And actually, it's a very, very interesting thing that Gitanas Nausėda won everywhere except Vilnius, except the capital. So Ingrida Šimonytė won here in the capital.
Why do you think that's the case?
Well, Vilnius is like more pro-conservative, right? You know, in the right of the spectrum of the political agenda, and the other Lithuania is like more to the left. So I believe this is the case.
So just tell us a little bit more about I mentioned a moment ago the fact that the campaigning from both sides was a focus on Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the impact on security in the region. I mean, what was that like during the campaign? How much was this a huge part of the debate?
Actually, we had a quite big surprise yesterday because our clearly pro-Russian candidate who was telling things like he is pro-peace, you know, and he would organize the peace talks in Vilnius. He got 7% of votes, and it was quite a big surprise for some people because not many people believe that we have that much people who are pro-Russian. So today, the day after the elections, the debate is going on. What we have to do to speak with those people. So yeah, we had the focus on the threat from Russia, but almost all candidates were like aligned, you know, that the Russia is threat, that we should support Ukraine, and we had that one candidate who was like who was telling when asked whose is Crimea, he was telling currently Russia's. So we have the 7% of society who support that, and this is the big challenge. The big and serious challenge for us, for our society in the future.
Tell us a little bit more about why 7% of the population voted for a candidate like that.
Actually, it didn't surprise me personally because we have surveys. We do surveys, and all the time when the question is about Russia and Ukraine, we have about 6% of people who are like on the other side of spectrum, you know, who are like pro-Russian. We have some districts in Lithuania who were like Russian speaking. They were watching Russian television, and we believe that this is the case. But of course, one of the biggest problem is that our main politicians, they don't go there, they don't speak with those people, and when nobody speaks to them, they find, you know, somebody who speaks to them and believe that he or she is saying. So this is the problem, the Russian propaganda and the Russian-speaking audience, because, for example, younger people, they don't really speak Russian anymore in Lithuania. So this is about the older generation who speaks Russian, who understands Russian, and who are still watching Russian propaganda.
So let's look ahead then to May the 26th, when there will be a runoff between Gitanas Nausėda and Ingrida Šimonytė. These are two people who, as you say, have faced each other before. By all accounts, they absolutely detest each other and don't speak to each other. But when you have an issue such as a growing number of voices which support Russia from within Lithuania, how are they now going to have to change their campaigns and what they say as they face each other next week?
Well, actually, a journalist already asked them about that result of the pro-Russian politician, and all of the politicians are saying that we should speak more with those people who believe that, you know, that narrative that only one Lithuanian candidate can solve the Ukrainian war, you know, nobody else in the world can do that, because he was like, I'm not, he was saying, I'm not pro-Russian, I'm pro-peace, you know, I want peace, I don't want war. And some people, I don't know, from naivety, they believed him that he's the only one in the whole world who could, you know, resolve the war, which is going on more than 2 years now. I believe that the second round will be, we will have that question that we should do something about it. But, as I work in the field of information warfare, propaganda and so on, I remember in 2014 when Russia occupied Crimea, we all in Lithuania talked that we should do something about it. Now we have 2024. And we are still talking about it. So this is obvious that our approach doesn't really work that well that we would like it to work.
And doing something about it. I mean, it was just last week that your foreign minister raised the prospect of sending military training personnel into Ukraine. How much has that affected that? How much has that suggestion affected things?
Actually, there are people that are supporting Ukraine by all means, and I would say that this is the biggest part of our society. Really, support for Ukraine is really very, very big, very important. And actually, Ingrida Šimonytė, who is in the second round, on her posters, we had the three flags. It was Lithuanian flag, it was European Union flag, and it was Ukraine's flag. So her message was clear that I am the candidate of the supporters of Ukraine. And actually, Gitanas Nausėda is supporting Ukraine too. So we have that 7% of people. Well, you may think that this is not a very big percent, but I think that for some people it was shock because we thought that, okay, maybe we have 3% of people. And we had that people who voted for this pro-Russian candidate in Vilnius too, for example, in other cities. So I think that the debate about the war, maybe some people are just tired about that debate because, we are constantly talking that the threat to Lithuania is imminent, that some people are so afraid that they're like selling their flats and going to live to Spain and so on. Maybe this is the problem, that some of our politicians, they are like talking more about the threat, but not about what we should do, how we should prepare for that.
Alexandra Ketlerinia, thank you so much for joining us on the line. The time here in London is 7:32 a.m. You're listening to The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A quick summary now of what else we're keeping an eye on today. Russia's long-standing defence minister Sergei Shoigu is expected to be removed from his post by President Vladimir Putin. He'll be replaced by the Deputy Prime Minister Andrei Belousov. Critics say Mr. Shoigu, who had no military background when he took the job in 2012, has often appeared out of his depth, especially since Russia invaded Ukraine 2 years ago. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has said that Israel lacks what he called a credible plan to protect Palestinian civilians in the southern Gazan city of Rafah. Mr. Blinken also warned that Israel is on a trajectory potentially to inherit an insurgency with many armed Hamas fighters left. Israel's planned invasion of Rafah has been fueling the deepest tension in relations between Israel and the US in generations. And Spain's Socialist Party has won the biggest share of the vote in this weekend's regional election in Catalonia. The lead over the Separatist Party, however, isn't big enough to secure them overall control of the region's parliament, meaning they'll need an alliance with one or more other parties to form a government. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. 8:33 in Vienna, which is where we head next, because last month the founder of the Austrian Beer Party, B-E-E-R, yes, you heard that correctly, Dominik Vlasny, announced that he's going to contest the country's parliamentary elections in September. Previously dismissed as a joke, how Vlasny and his party are now enjoying growing support, including among first-time voters, and they're expected to make a good showing in a poll that could propel the far-right Freedom Party back into government and complicate Austrian politics even further. So, to help us answer the question to beer or not to beer, let's hear now from Alexei Koloryov in Vienna.
On the left of the returning officer, you can see Arthur Smith, the sensible candidate, and his agent. And on the other side is the silly candidate, Jethro Walrus Titty, with his agent and his wife.
It's always good to have a bit of silliness in politics. In places like Britain, there's a long and proud tradition of political mischief.
Silly party.
32,108. Well, there's the first result, and the Silly Party have held Leicester. What do you make of that, Norman?
Well, this is largely as I predicted, except that the Silly Party won.
In Austria, politics has always been on the serious side. And when Dominik Vlasny started the Beer Party, or Beer Party, in 2015, nobody really took him seriously. There had been beer parties in Europe before, and at first Vlasny, who's a punk musician and cabaret artist as well as a practicing doctor, stayed faithfully on message. Drink and do nothing.
Ja, generell machen wir das jetzt weiter, was wir so erfolgreich begonnen haben, nämlich nix. Ja.
But when he came third in the Austrian presidential election in 2022, it was clear that something had changed. And this year he's turned his sights to the Austrian parliament.
Our latest poll, based on a nationally representative sample with 1,000 people, has shown that the Beer Party is now around 7%, which would quite probably mean that they would be a member of the next parliament.
Johannes Klotz is a data scientist at OGM, Austria's leading polling and market research company. He watched the 2022 presidential vote closely.
Voting analyses have shown that Dominik Vlasny took some votes from non-voters, which would mean they were somehow motivated to go to the polls.
And is it out of protest? Is it as a joke? Or do people seriously think, this is a serious politician, this is a serious party, or is it just a joke?
Protest? I'm not so sure about protest, because protest in Austria is usually the Freedom Party. It has some kind of monopoly on the protest votes, both from urban and rural voters. I do think that some people believe that Dominik Vlasny, because of his background as a physician, as a musician, he's also quite telegenic, I would say, believe that he can bring some fresh ideas, especially in the big old parties that are very structurally conservative, and believe that some things he might do better than the elected people now can.
Wir wachsen total organisch. Wir stampfen in Wahrheit eine parlamentsfitte Partei aus dem Boden.
At a press conference last week, Vlasny said his party had grown into a legitimate parliamentary force. He's also brought in some fresh new faces.
Viktoria Müllner, Thomas Schuster, Eva Maria Leuke und Stefan Obkircher.
And begun taking a stand on all the big issues of the day, including the Israel-Gaza war, violence against women and the rising cost of living.
Der Terrorangriff der Hamas und die Bombardierung des Gazastreifens markieren. In Österreich wurden 2023 bislang 26 Frauenmorde. Merry Crisis and a Happy New Fear. Angst?
As a qualified physician, he's also in favor of legalizing recreational cannabis use.
Das ist eine super Sache, und wenn die wissenschaftliche Lage dazu so eindeutig ist, wie sie sich jetzt präsentiert, why not? Yeah.
So if the Beer Party makes it into Parliament, and there's a good chance that the Communist Party will too, for the first time since the mid-1960s, what sort of government can we expect? A last word to pollster Johannes Klotz.
That would be very difficult then, because given the Freedom Party and the Conservative Party do not have the majority in the parliament, this would mean that any government would consist of at least three parties. And when we know how difficult it is already when two parties work together, one can imagine that it's not going to get better. But when we look at the international picture, it is also in other countries. Look at Israel, look at Belgium, look at Germany. It's very difficult to build governments with a majority in a diverse society. And I think this is what is now going to come, or most likely to come also in Austria.
For Monocle in Vienna, I'm Alexei Korolov.
Thanks, Alexei. You're listening to Monocle Radio. 9:38 a.m. in Mogadishu, 8:38 a.m. in Zurich. Now, Somalia is calling for an end to the United Nations political mission in Somalia. The UN has been helping the country since 2013, but recently there have been signs that Mogadishu wishes to sever ties. Well, Michael Keating is Executive Director at the European Institute of Peace and former head of the UN Assistance Mission in Somalia. A very good morning to you, Michael. Welcome to Monocle Radio.
Thank you.
So this has taken everybody by surprise, hasn't it?
Not totally. It is a bit of a shock, but there's a longer-term trend of many countries around the world sort of wanting to assert themselves, and one of the phenomena is taking action on the presence of the UN.
So just explain...
At a political and peacekeeping level, yeah.
So let's divide this into the political and the peacekeeping level. The political level is this immediate problem, isn't it? I mean, what was the UN doing in Somalia in terms of helping with peace building and security reforms, etc.? And why does it seem to have gone wrong in Mogadishu?
Well, I'm not sure it has gone wrong. The UN Special Political Mission was set up in 2013. So it's not that old. It's about 10 or 11 years old. It came on top of an existing presence of the UN doing humanitarian and other work. The idea of a special political mission is because the Security Council, which creates it, and which, by the way, has to agree to its ending, determines that a country needs additional help beyond the development and humanitarian to resolve a number of hardcore political problems. And typically they include, armed conflict, they include state building, security sector reform, organizing elections, peacekeeping, and so on. Now, the issue in Somalia is that the president clearly has taken the view for I would imagine primarily political reasons, that these things are now more or less under management in Somalia, and therefore the presence of an internationally mandated political mission is no longer required. That's his judgment. And on the one hand, I salute him, for having the competence to think that. The question is whether he's right, whether without an international presence mandated by the Security Council is actually going to be good for the country, or whether it could be a little bit premature.
Indeed. The president said that the UN played a critical role, but now has outlived its usefulness. He's also added that it was incredibly expensive. It was about $100 million US dollars per year. But you admire his bravery here, but how correct?
Confidence. Yeah.
But how correct an assumption is the president making?
Well, as I say, I feel sort of slightly conflicted about this, because when I was there as the head of the political mission, I used to say my job is, only you can solve your own political and electoral and conflict-related problems, but having an international presence, first of all, keeps you on the radar screen internationally. Secondly, means we can bring all sorts of experience from around the world to bear on terms acceptable to Somalis. And thirdly, it's probably a good, a way of attracting more resources and international support for what you're doing. So I think the risk is that and there's an important detail, by the way, which is Somalia may be elected to be a non-permanent member of the Security Council in January. And so, I think his political calculation is that Somalia can do it on its own. But if you talk to other Somalis, they say, well, this is a pretty high-risk approach, that there are still massive issues in terms of the relationship of the federal government with the federal member states. You've still got Al-Shabaab, you've still got all sorts of countries using Somalia as a sort of proxy theatre for disputes they have between themselves. You've got the issues of the election, of unresolved constitutional issues, and the president saying that, the Somali political establishment is now strong and mature enough to resolve these problems all on its own is quite a gamble. And as I say, on the one hand, great that he thinks that. On the other, I'm not, time will tell whether he's correct. By the way, they wrote to the President of the General Assembly, copied the Secretary General asking for an end of the mission, but actually missions end through a determination of the Security Council. So this is not a done deal yet.
Tell us a little bit more about the security and the safekeeping missions that are also being asked to leave as well, because the UN-mandated African Union mission in the country is due to withdraw and to hand the security back over to the Somalis by the end of the year. I mean, where does that leave Somalia?
Well, one of the reasons a special political mission was created in 2013 was exactly because there was an African Union military presence under UN mandate, and it was felt that a political mission was needed to report both to the African Union and the UN on how that was deployed and progressed and achieved its objectives. Now, the problem, 23,000 troops, they are not all leaving. This is still in play, but it looks as if that number of troops will be reduced to about half by the end of this year. Indeed, the Somalis believe that the money that goes to the African Union troops, much of it coming from the European Union, would be better served by going to Somali security forces. But that begs a much bigger issue as to whether the Somali security forces are themselves capable of taking on the responsibilities that have been given to the African Union troops, namely to contain, if not reduce, al-Shabaab. And over the last year, the Somalis have stepped up their efforts to fight al-Shabaab with actually very mixed results. And so one of the problems is that in a country that is still emerging, Somalia, from so many decades of conflict, whether the security forces, whether it's the army, the police, the intelligence, the customs and frontier people, whether they are robust enough to take on these responsibilities, which, by the way, are focused on insurgency, but go beyond that. There are many other disputes, including disputes between, federal member states and disputes over resource extraction, and so on and so on. And again, it's a judgment call. And most, I think, analysts would say that they're not there yet. They are not yet in a position to represent genuinely national interests. They still are fairly contested in terms of to whom they report and how they're funded and their capability.
Michael Keating, thank you so much for joining us on the line. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Let's talk business now with Isabel Hamilton, senior reporter at the Daily Upside. A very good morning to you, Isabel.
Good morning.
Welcome back to Monocle Radio. There's a great story going around, well, not a great story, but an important story. Huge moves towards AI and the world being powered digitally, but power is a big problem.
Yes, so this is a piece that came out in the Wall Street Journal, and it primarily focuses on the US state of Georgia, where lots of new data centers are being thrown up. And data centers are essential if we're going to use a lot more AI, because AI uses a lot of computing power. It takes it a lot of energy is the problem, though. And Georgia's state utility company has raised its demand projections for electricity by, I think, about 16 times what it is now, which is astonishing, because actually for the last sort of 15 years, electricity demand overall has been pretty flat, because even though the world is getting more electrified, our technologies are becoming more efficient, they use less electricity. AI, there's just no getting around it. It's incredibly power hungry. It needs so much energy. And it's a real problem because, if states want to switch to green energy, that build out isn't quite happening fast enough for these new data centers. So it really is causing a bit of tension.
It is the endless issue of the growing number of data centers around the world that store absolutely everything. I mean, given the fact that this is a very clear and present problem, are there any voices suggesting what can be done about this?
I think so to just sort of slow down and make sure that you build out renewable infrastructure first. Unfortunately, Wall Street's very excited about AI. There are lots of companies pitching headfirst into it. But there are some companies that I think are trying to build renewable energy into that equation. I know Google has funded a wind farm off the coast of Holland. But yeah, it's just an incredible amount of energy that's required. And I think water as well. You know, they suck up a lot of water because they need to cool the computing, infrastructure that's inside.
Let's move on to a story about the continuing battle between the United States and legislation and China and its all-present apps on everybody's phones in America.
Yes, so this story is about an app called Temu. Temu is an e-commerce app. It's acquired a tremendous amount of success in a short amount of time, partly because the stuff on there is remarkably cheap, slightly alarmingly cheap. And it has been on this incredibly aggressive advertising blitz, especially in the US. They bought Super Bowl ads. Super Bowl ads alone cost billions and billions of dollars. Obviously, there's also a huge social media marketing campaign. But now some sources told the Wall Street Journal that Temu is thinking about shifting focus away from the US to Europe and other countries because of the TikTok bill that just got passed, which, TikTok's going to fight it, of course, but US lawmakers have sort of provisionally said that they want to see TikTok banned or divested to a US company. And this is really alarming for Temu. So Temu is sort of trying to wean itself off US customers.
And let's move on finally to an article in the Financial Times about Apple and its ad blocking plans.
Yes, so Apple is reportedly working on building ad blockers into its browser Safari, and that's come as a bit of a shock to media organisations, so much so that the News Media Association in the UK has sent a letter to Apple urging them not to go through with this, because the news media, some news sites have got ads on the website. You'll scroll through and you'll see ads in the sidebars and things like that. And that's part of the way they make money. And if Apple sort of automatically blocks them, it's just completely kiboshing that revenue stream. And I find this story interesting because historically there has been a real tension between the news media and Silicon Valley companies, but typically Apple's not really been a part of that. And now it is. Normally it's platforms like Facebook and Google, and now it's Apple.
Isabel Hamilton, thank you so much for joining us. You're listening to The Globalist. Finally, let's look back at this weekend's Eurovision Song Contest. I've just about recovered, and I'm wondering whether Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Monocle's Eurovision correspondent, and the man who watched it for us in Malmo, I'm wondering how he's feeling. Fernando, good morning.
Emma, I think, unlike you, I think I'm not yet completely recovered. For an Eurovision fan, it's quite hard, actually, the following days. But here we are. I mean, it's been a very good show this year, even with all the controversies. Perhaps it's been the most controversial in the last decade or so, Emma.
Indeed. So what should we do with first? Let's play a little bit of the winning singer first, Nemo from Switzerland. Considered widely to be a worthy winner of Eurovision this year. I mean, the staging was astonishing, wasn't it, Fernando? And I was going to ask you. I mean, you were in the arena itself. I think acts had 40 seconds to turn around their set and their stage. I mean, it must have been thrilling to watch.
I mean, it's been one of the best staging, and even the set designer of the show told me it was the most challenging as well. And the thing about Nemo, there's a certain charisma about the artist, about the Swiss entry. It was never my favorite, I gotta be honest. But I could see in the crowd, people were connecting to it. I'm getting messages from my friends, oh, I'm so happy that Switzerland won. So in that sense, it hasn't been controversial because, yeah, as you say, it's a worthy winner and a return to Switzerland, the country that hosted the very first Eurovision. Been trying hard, the Swiss. We had some interesting artists in recent years, like Luca Hänni. I think he was third or fourth. So Switzerland was trying really hard. And I think, Sing Celine Dion 1988, they never won. So now people are saying where the event to be hosted. And there's one thing about Nemo as well. What a nice person. It's in the press conference. I think this is quite nice to see in this year. There's been quite a lot of bitchiness and a lot of kind of rumors and gossip. The press area, everybody was kind of stunted. I mean, every day there was some rumors that this artist might pull it off, or there might be another scandal. Nemo is great in that sense.
So let's address this fact that we went into the Eurovision Song Contest with protests pro-Palestine, controversy and the booing of the Israeli entrant in the rehearsals and issues with that. Then the Dutch entrant got knocked out because he was aggressive, reportedly aggressive to a camera crew. Then we had the Irish people who were cross about something else. I mean, it seemed like a real mess before it started.
It was a mess. You mentioned the Irish contestant, which was a great song. There's been a lot of criticism against the EBU, and some people are saying why Israel should be allowed to compete this year when Russia was disqualified. And, I'm not going to get into this world of politics, but yeah, a lot of people kind of disagreed fundamentally with the EBU. And there's the opposite side as well. And as you can see with Israel, when there's a reaction to something, there's an even stronger reaction in return. Israel won the televoting in the majority of countries. That might come as a surprise for some. But, I think people did vote very politically this year. At the same time that people voted for the Ukrainian victory in 2022, this time maybe people felt, you know what, I'm going to vote for Israel. And I'm not sure necessarily because they enjoyed the song. And yeah, Eurovision is political, right, Emma?
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? Because everybody says that once you're in the arena, it is all about, forging peace and love through music. It's always been political. And was this a year when it was generally accepted that you can't disassociate culture from politics?
Absolutely. And as you know, I'm hosting the Globalist. In recent years, the world has been a very challenging place. The conflict in Ukraine and, of course, now, Gaza and Israel, it is being a challenging place to be, So, of course, Eurovision will reflect that. And I did mention when we had our nice conversation on Monocle on Sunday yesterday, that Eurovision reflects a little bit the world and its many kind of political changes. Let's be honest, another historic fact that Nemo, the Swiss artist, Nemo is a non-binary person. So that's the first on Eurovision. So there's some quite interesting elements to it as well.
Finally, I don't know if you've seen the Monocle Minute this week, but our editorial director, Tyler Brulé, has written about the soft power potential for Switzerland and whether Switzerland is exactly the right country to take on the Eurovision Song Contest when the world is in such a crisis, at such a crisis point.
I agree. And I think Switzerland will be a great host. Of course, Tyler in his column this morning was saying that Zurich will be the best place. And I agree. But the thing about Eurovision, that you can never be sure they would be necessarily in the biggest city. I mean, look, this year was Malmö, not in Stockholm. Last year was Liverpool, not London. The previous year was Turin, not Rome or Milan. But, I do think it should be Zurich because Lausanne, they already hosted Eurovision, ages ago, but that's fine. I think Zurich is fun. Can you imagine if it's a sunny day in Zurich, all the fans there enjoying the show? I think it would be amazing. And we have our lovely office there where the after party will be, right? Anna?
Yes, I think that helps a little from the point of Monocle's perspective. Fernando, we have 15 seconds left. Which of the Eurovision 2024 songs are going to appear regularly on the Monocle Radio playlist? You're in charge.
Well, I am in charge. I think the Cyprus entry, definitely. A lot of people loved that.
Oh, she was great. She was brilliant. Great. Yeah, she was amazing.
And I know you like Austria as well. Thank you, Emma, because it was robbed. It was robbed because everybody was raving at the arena. I don't get the public sometimes, I think it was excellent track. But yeah, let's say I think Cyprus and Austria are a good start, but there might be others here and there on the playlist.
A few surprises to come. Fernando Augusto Pacheco, many thanks as ever for joining us on The Globalist. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests, and thanks too to the producers Vincent McAviney, Chris Chermak and Monica Lillis. Our researcher was George Ruskin and our studio manager was Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. Join me for that if you can. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you for listening. Have a great week.